Remote Desktop. Remote Desktop was first introduced in Windows XP and it's now been carried across to Windows Server 2003. For those of you who are new to Remote Desktop, it's a method of accessing a remote computer and to be able to view and use the computer as if you were sitting in front of it logged on locally. Now by default, Remote Desktop can only accept a maximum of 2 incoming connections over the TCP port 3389. Now this means that including a locally logged on user, you can have a maximum of 3 users logged onto a Windows Server 2003 desktop. And unlike terminal services, you cannot use Remote Desktop to provide application sharing. Now there's 2 parts to a Remote Desktop connection, the client and the server. The client is where you initiate the Remote Desktop connection, the server is the end that accepts the connection and displays the desktop. So let's go and take a look at the server side of the connection first. Now by default, even though the Remote Desktop is installed, it must be explicitly allowed before any connections can be made. So to enable the Remote Desktop feature, we'll click on Start, and then we'll right click on My Computer and we'll select Properties. Then we'll select the Remote tab. Now we have 2 options. The first here is to enable remote assistance, and that's the topic of another video, so for the moment we're going to ignore this option. The second option is to allow users to connect remotely to this computer, and you'll note that this box by default is not checked. So to enable Remote Desktop, we need to check this box. Now we just get a little informational message that tells us that some local accounts might not have passwords, which isn't actually true in our case, but accounts used for remote connections must have passwords. So that's one of the requirements of being able to use Remote Desktop. And we also just get a note here that says if we are using internet connection sharing or a firewall, then we must open port 3389. So we'll just click on OK to dismiss that message. Okay, now down here we can see the full computer name of this server. Now this is the name that you'll need to type into the Remote Desktop client to be able to connect. Now you also have here a link which will take you off to Windows 2003 Help for Remote Desktop should you need any more information. Now by default, once we check this box, allow users to connect remotely to this computer, if we were to click OK right now, the only account that can connect via Remote Desktop to this box is the administrator account. So to enable other users to connect to this server using Remote Desktop, we need to add them to the Remote Desktop users group. So to enable additional users to connect to this server using Remote Desktop, we'll click on Select Remote Users. Now you can see that we currently have no users defined, although we can see that the administrator already has access. So to add a user to our Remote Desktop users group, we can simply click on Add. And then we can locate our user using Active Directory. So we'll click on Advanced and we'll click on Find Now, and then we'll get a list of all the users that we have in our domain. Now I have one here, XP User 1, so I'll select that and select OK and then OK again. And now XP User 1 has been put into our Remote Desktop users group. So we'll click on OK. Now XP User 1 will be able to connect to our server using their standard username and password. Okay, well let's go and take a look at the client side of the Remote Desktop. So we'll go and click on Start, All Programs, Accessories, Communications, and here we'll launch Remote Desktop Connection. Now as simple as it gets, all we need to do to make a connection at this point is to type in the name of the server and then hit Connect. So as you can see, you can even use Remote Desktop on the server you're logged onto. Now there really isn't much point to this unless you're testing a new account or a policy or something like that, but you certainly can do it if you wish. Okay, well I'm just going to cancel this login. It'll take us back to our Remote Desktop login box. And now we'll go over here to the right and we'll click on Options and take a look at what we have available. Now on the General tab, we can see our connection information. We can also see the last server we connected to, the username we connected with, and of course we have a password box here. Now this enables us to pre-configure the connection with the password so that our remote server will just log us straight in. Now this might be convenient, but it's not really a great feature from a security perspective, so I don't recommend using this option. We can also see some domain information that you'll need to log onto a different domain, and at the bottom here we have the ability to save a remote connection or open a saved connection. Now, saving our settings doesn't save the remote desktop or anything like that. What it does is enable you to pre-configure all of this information here and then save the file in an RDP file. Now, RDP being the extension for the remote desktop connection file. Then all you have to do is double click this file later on and it will zip off and connect to whatever server you specified here using whatever credentials you supplied. Now, that's great if you connect to different servers using different settings. Now, on our display tab, we have the options of setting what size we'd like the remote desktop to be displayed in. We can just drag the slider over to the left to make the remote desktop window smaller and all the way to the right to make it full screen. We can also specify what color depth we want the remote desktop to appear in. The default is 16-bit color or 65,000 colors, but we can select all the way down from 256 colors all the way up to 24-bit color, which is about 16.7 million colors. Now, the biggest drawback to using greater color depths is that more information will need to be sent back from the server to your client computer, and obviously the more data that needs to be transferred, the slower your connection will be. Now, generally, if you're connecting to a server anyway, you probably won't have a requirement for 24-bit color, so the default value of 16-bit color is generally more than enough. And finally, we have an option to select if we'd like to see our connection bar when we're in full screen mode. Now, personally, I like this feature and it is turned on by default, so I'm just going to hit connect again and I'll show you the connection bar. Now, at the top here of our remote desktop screen, you can see our connection bar. It shows you what server you're connected to, and that's very useful if you happen to have multiple remote connections going at the same time. Now, we also have a little pin icon here. When this icon is selected, the connection bar will remain visible at the top of your screen at all times. If it's not selected, it will disappear after a few seconds, as you can see. Now, to make the connection bar reappear again, we can simply scroll our mouse up to the top of the screen. Now, over here on the right, we also have a minimize button, which of course will minimize our screen to the taskbar. We have a window button, which of course will make our remote desktop appear in a window, as you can see. And then we have a close button as well. Now, on the local resources tab, we have the option of playing any sounds that you'd normally hear on the remote server on our local computer. And this is useful if your application does give you audio feedback. Now, we can also opt to use Alt-Tab in full screen mode or to restrict Alt-Tab key presses to the remote or local computer only. Now, Alt-Tab is used to switch between applications which are currently running on your computer. Now, by default, this only works in full screen mode. But of course, yes, we can change it to local computer or remote computer if we like. Now, down here we have the option of connecting our disk drives, printers and serial ports when we're logged on to the remote computer. So what this means, for example, is if we have, say, disk drives checked, when we're logged onto the server and we open up Explorer, you'll not only see the local server's hard drives listed, but you'll also see your client computer's hard drives listed as well. And this is really useful if you need to copy things from your server to your PC and vice versa. Now, on the Programs tab, we can choose if we want to run a program when we start the connection. Now, this program will start on the remote server, not on your local computer. Now, what we'd do is we'd simply check this box and then we'd type in the name of the program that we want to run. Now, an important thing to realize with this setting is that if you do elect to run a program at startup, then that is all the user can do. So, for example, if we wanted our user to be able to connect and run Notepad in startup, we'll type in notepad.exe, and down here we'd punch in the path to the file, which is under our Windows System 32 directory. So I'm just going to click on Connect, and because we opted to display our disk drives in the remote connection, we do just get a message which does say that our disk drives are going to be made available to our remote computer, but it might be potentially unsafe. So I'm just going to choose here, don't prompt me for this again, I'll choose OK, and now we're going to go off and connect to our server. Now I'm going to go and connect as our administrator, so I'll type in the username of administrator and of course the administrator's password and click on OK. Alright, now we can see it opens up with Notepad. So we can certainly do anything that we'd want to do in Notepad, and what we'll do now is we'll go and close down Notepad, and we won't save it, but you'll notice that it logs us off completely from the remote server. So the rule of thumb here is if a user does need to run multiple applications or remain logged on to the remote computer to do other things, then don't choose that option. Okay, our last tab here is the Experience tab. And this is where we can specify options that basically make your desktop look better or your connection work faster. Now in the drop-down box here, we can select a predefined connection type. And selecting one of these just simply changes some of the boxes that we have checked down here. So for example, we can see the default is a 56K modem, and we're missing a desktop background, we're missing the ability to show contents of a window while we drag it, and of course we don't see any menu or window animations, but we do see themes and we do cache bitmaps. So we'll go up to the drop-down box, and we can also simulate what happens if we're connected via a LAN. Now via a LAN obviously has a little bit more bandwidth than a 56K modem, so things like the desktop background and all our animations are included in our connection by default. Now if I do decide I want to make this a custom one, I'll simply uncheck, say for example, themes, and this changes up the top here for a custom connection. Now finally at the bottom here, we can reconnect if our connection happens to die, and that option is there by default. So if you do experience a dropped-out connection, we want our remote desktop connection to automatically reconnect. Okay, I'm just going to go back to my Programs tab, and I'm going to remove all these, and now we'll go back to our General tab, and then we can simply save our connection. So I'll just go and save this on my desktop, and I'm going to call this one Admin, and I'll click Save. And over here on our desktop you can see my admin.rdp file. So I'll close this down, and now all I'll have to do is double click on this file, and we can see it connects to server 1. I'll just simply enter in the password of the administrator. Okay, and there you go, you can see we are logged into our remote server. Now practically everything that we could do sitting at the local server, we can now do remotely using Remote Desktop. Now I know that you're going to take a look at the Remote Desktop capabilities of Windows Server 2003. It's a fast and powerful method of providing remote administration to your entire environment.